Section 3 of Self-Help. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Self-Help with Illustrations of Conduct and Perseverance by Samuel Smiles. Chapter 1, Self-Help, National and Individual, Part 2. The chemist Vauquelin was the son of a peasant of Saint André de Herbetot in the Calvados. When a boy at school, though poorly clad, he was full of bright intelligence, and the master, who taught him to read and write, when praising him for his diligence, used to say, "Go on, my boy, work, study, call in, and one day you will go as well dressed as a parish church warden." A country apothecary who visited the school admired the robust boy's arms and offered to take him into his laboratory to pound his drugs, to which Vauquelin assented in the hope of being able to continue his lessons. But the apothecary would not permit him to spend any part of his time in learning, and on ascertaining this, the youth immediately determined to quit his service. He therefore left Saint André and took the road for Paris with his haversack on his back. Arrived there, he searched for a place as apothecary's boy, but could not find one. Worn out by fatigue and destitution, Vauquelin fell ill, and in that state was taken to the hospital, where he thought he should die. But better things were in store for the poor boy. He recovered and again proceeded in a search of employment, which he at length found with an apothecary. Shortly after, he became known to Fourcroy, the eminent chemist, who was so pleased with the youth that he made him his private secretary. And many years after, on the death of that great philosopher, Vauquelin succeeded him as professor of chemistry. Finally, in 1829, the electors of the district of Calvados appointed him their representative in the Chamber of Deputies, and he re-entered in triumph the village which he had left so many years before, so poor and obscure. England has no parallels to show of promotions from the ranks of the army to the highest military offices, which have been so common in France since the First Revolution. Laquelle Overt Oxtalines has there received many striking illustrations which would doubtless be matched among ourselves where the road to promotion is open. Hoche, Humbert, and Pique Hedgegrue began their respective careers as private soldiers. Hoche, while in the king's army, was accustomed to embroidered waistcoats to enable him to earn money wherewith to purchase books on military science. Humbert was a scapegrace when he knew that at 16 he ran away from home and was by turns servant to a tradesman at Nancy, a workman at Lyons, and a hawker of rabbit skins. In 1792 he enlisted as a volunteer, and in a year he was general of brigade. Kleber, Lefebvre, Souchet, Victor, Lyons, Sault, Massena, Saint-Cyr de Hulon, Maugrat, Augereau, Bessiers, and Ney all rose from the ranks. In some cases, promotion was rapid. In others, it was slow. Saint-Cyr, the son of a tanner of Toul, began life as an actor, after which he enlisted in the chasseurs and was promoted to a captaincy within a year. Victor du de Belluno enlisted in the artillery in 1781. During the events preceding the Revolution, he was discharged, but immediately on the outbreak of war he re-enlisted, and in the course of a few months his intrepidity and ability secured his promotion as adjutant major and chief of battalion. Murat, quote, Le Beau Sabir, unquote, was the son of a village innkeeper in Périgord, where he looked after the horses. He first enlisted in a regiment of chasseurs from which he was dismissed for insubordination, but again enlisting, he shortly rose to the rank of colonel. Ney enlisted at 18 in a hussar regiment and gradually advanced step by step. Kleber soon discovered his merits, surnaming him the Indefatigable, and promoted him to be adjutant general. when only 25. On the other hand, Soult was 6 years from the date of his enlistment before he reached the rank of sergeant. But Soult's advancement was rapid compared with that of Messina, who served for 14 years before he was made sergeant, and though he afterwards rose successfully, step by step, to the grades of colonel, general of division, and marshal, he declared that the post of sergeant was the step of which all others had cost him the most labor to win. Similar promotions from the ranks in the French army have continued down to our own day. Chan Garnier entered the king's bodyguard as a private in 1815. Marshal Augiard served 4 years in the ranks, after which he was made an officer. Marshal Randon, the present French Minister of War, began his military career as a drummer boy. In the portrait of him in the gallery at Versailles, his hand rests upon a drumhead, the picture thus being painted at his own request. Instances such as these inspire French soldiers with enthusiasm for their service, as each private feels that he may possibly carry the baton of a marshal in his knapsack. The instances of men in this and other countries who, by dint of persevering application and energy, have raised themselves from the humblest ranks of industry to eminent positions of usefulness and influence in society, are indeed so numerous that they have long ceased to be regarded as exceptional. Looking at some of the more remarkable, it might almost be said that early encounter with difficulty and adverse circumstance was a necessary and indispensable condition of success. The British House of Commons has always contained a considerable number of such self-raised men, fitting representatives of the industrial character of the people, and it is to the credit of our legislature that they have been welcomed and honored here. When the late Joseph Brotherton, member for Salford, in the course of the discussion on the 10 Hours Bill, detailed with true pathos the hardships and fatigues to which he had been subjected when working as a factory boy in a cotton mill, and described the resolution which he had then formed, that if it was ever in his power, he would endeavor to ameliorate the condition of that class, Sir James Graham rose immediately after him and declared amidst the cheers of the House that he did not know that Mr. Brotherton's origin had been so humble, but that it rendered him more proud than he had ever been before of the House of Commons, to think that a person risen from that condition should be able to sit side by side on equal terms with the hereditary gentry of the land. The late Mr. Fox, member for Oldham, was accustomed to introduce his recollections of past times with the words, quote, "When I was working as a weaver boy at Norwich," unquote, and there are other members of Parliament still living whose origins has been equally humble. Mr. Lindsay, the well-known shipowner, until recently member for Sunderland, once told the simple story of his life to the electors of Weymouth, in answer to an attack made upon him by his political opponents. He had been left an orphan at 14, and when he left Glasgow for Liverpool to push his way in the world, not being able to pay the usual fare, the captain of the steamer agreed to take his labor in exchange, and the boy worked his passage by trimming the coals in the coal hole. At Liverpool he remained for 7 weeks before he could obtain employment, during which time he lived in sheds and fared hardly, until at last he found shelter on board a West Indiaman. He entered as a boy, and before he was 19, by steady good conduct, he had risen to the command of a ship. At 23 he retired from the sea and settled on shore, after which his progress was rapid. Quote, "He had prospered," quote, he said, quote, "by steady industry, by constant work, and by ever keeping in view the great principle of doing to others as you would be done by," unquote. The career of Mr. William Jackson of Birkenhead, the present member for North Derbyshire, bears considerable resemblance to that of Mr. Lindsay. His father, surgeon at Lancaster, died leaving a family of 11 children, of whom William Jackson was the 7th son. The elder boys had been well educated while the father lived, but at his death the younger members had to shift for themselves. William when under 12 years old, was taken from school and put to hard work at a ship's side from 6 in the morning till 9 at night. His master falling ill, the boy was taken into the counting house where he had more leisure. This gave him an opportunity of reading, and having obtained access to a set of the Encyclopedia Britannica, he read the volumes throughout from A to Z, partially by day, but chiefly at night. He afterwards put himself to a trade, was diligent and succeeded in it. Now he has ships sailing on almost every sea and holds commercial relations with nearly every country on the globe. Among like men of the same class may be ranked the late Richard Cobden, whose start in life was equally humble. The son of a small farmer at Midhurst in Sussex, he was sent at an early age to London and employed as a boy in a warehouse in the city. He was diligent, well-conducted, and eager for information. His master, a man of the old school, warned him against too much reading, but the boy went on in his own course, storing his mind with the wealth found in books. He was promoted from one position of trust to another, became a traveler for his own house, secured a large connection, and eventually started in business as a calico printer at Manchester. Taking an interest in public questions, more especially in popular education, his attention was gradually drawn to the subject of the Corn Laws, to the repeal of which he may be said to have devoted his fortune and his life. It may be mentioned as a curious fact that the first speech he delivered in public was a total failure. But he had great perseverance, application, and energy, and with persistency and practice he became at length one of the most persuasive and effective public speakers, extorting the disinterested eulogy of even Sir Robert Peel himself. M. Doyen de Hughes, the French ambassador, has eloquently said of Mr. Cobden that he was, quote, a living proof of what merit, perseverance, and labor can accomplish, one of the most complex examples of those men who, sprung from the humblest ranks of society, raise themselves to the highest rank in public estimation by the effect of their own worth and of their personal services. Finally, one of the rarest examples of the solid qualities inherent in the English character, unquote. In all these cases, strenuous individual application was the price paid for distinction, excellence of any sort being invariably placed upon the reach of indolence. It is the diligent hand and head alone that maketh rich, in self-culture, growth, in wisdom, and in business. Even when men are born to wealth and high social position, any solid reputation which they may individually achieve can only be attained by energetic application, for though an inheritance of acres may be bequeathed, an inheritance of knowledge and wisdom cannot. The wealthy man may pay others for doing his work for him, but it is impossible to get his thinking done for him by another, or to purchase any kind of self-culture. Indeed, the doctrine that excellence in any pursuit is only to be achieved by laborious application holds as true in the case of the man of wealth as in of Drew and Gifford, whose only school was a cobbler's stall, or Hugh Miller, whose only college was a Cromarty stone quarry. Riches and eases, it is perfectly clear, are not necessary for man's highest culture, else had not the world been so largely indebted in all times to those who have sprung from the humbler ranks. An easy and luxurious existence does not train men to effort or encounter with difficulty, nor does it awaken that consciousness of power which is so necessary for energetic and effective action in life. Indeed, so far from poverty being a misfortune, it may, by vigorous self-help, be converted even into a blessing, rousing a man to that struggle with the world in which, though some may purchase ease by degradation, the right-minded and true-hearted find strength, confidence, and triumph. Bacon says, quote, men seem neither to understand their riches nor their strength. Of the former, they believe greater things than they should, of the latter much less. Self-reliance and self-denial will teach a man to drink out of his own cistern and eat his own sweetbread, and to learn and labor truly to get his living, and carefully to expend the good things committed to his trust." Unquote. Riches are so great a temptation to ease and self-indulgence, to which men are by nature prone, that the glory is all the greatest who, born to ample fortunes, nevertheless take an active part in the work of their generation, who, quote, "scorn delights and live laborious days." Unquote. It is to the honor of wealthier ranks in this country that they are not idlers, for they do their fair share of the work of the state, and usually take more of their fair share in its dangers. It was a fine thing said of a subaltern officer in the Peninsular campaigns, observed trudging alone through mud and mire by the side of his regiment, quote, "There goes 15,000 L a year." Unquote. And in our own day, the bleak slopes of Sebastopol and the burning soil of India have borne witness to the like noble self-denial and devotion on the part of our gentler classes. May a gallant and noble fellow of rank and estate, having risked his life or lost it, in one or other of those fields of action in the service of his country, nor have the wealthier classes been undistinguished in the more peaceful pursuits of philosophy and science. Take, for instance, the great names of Bacon, the father of modern philosophy, and of Worcester, Boyle, Cavendish, Talbot, and Ross in science. The last name may be regarded as the great mechanic of the peerage, a man who, if he had not been born a peer, would probably have taken the highest rank as an inventor. So thorough is his knowledge of smithwork that he is said to have been pressed on one occasion to accept the foremanship of a large workshop by a manufacturer to whom his rank was unknown. The great Ross telescope of his own fabrication is certainly the most extraordinary instrument of the kind that has yet been constructed. But it is principally in the departments of politics and literature that we find the most energetic laborers amongst our higher classes. Success in these lines of actions, as in all others, can only be achieved through industry, practice, and study, and the great minister or parliamentary leader must necessarily be amongst the very hardest of workers. Such was Palmerston, and such are Derby and Russell, Disraeli and Gladstone. These men have had the benefit of no 10-hours bill, but have often during the busy season of Parliament worked, quote, "double shift," unquote, almost day and night. One of the most illustrious of such workers in modern time was unquestionably by the late Sir Robert Peel. He possessed in an ordinary degree the power of continuous intellectual labor, nor did he spare himself. His career, indeed, presented a remarkable example how much a man of comparatively moderate powers can accomplish by means of assiduous application and an indefatigable industry. During the 40 years that he held a seat in Parliament, his labors prodigious. He was a most conscientious man, and whatever he undertook to do, he did thoroughly. All his speeches bear evidence of his careful study of everything that had been spoken or written on the subject under consideration. He was elaborate almost to excess, and spared no pains to adapt himself to the various capacities of his audience. Withal, he possessed much practical sagacity, great strength of purpose, and power to direct the issues of action with a steady hand and eye. In one respect, he surpassed most men. His principles, broadened and enlarged with time and age, instead of contracting, only served to mellow and ripen his nature. To the last he continued open to the reception of new views, and though many thought him cautious to excess, he did not allow himself to fall into that indiscriminating admiration of the past which is the palsy of many minds similarly educated, and renders the old age of many nothing but a pity. The indefatigable industry of Lord Brougham has become almost proverbial. His public labors have extended over a period of upwards of 60 years, during which he has ranged over many fields, of law, literature, politics, and science, and achieved distinction in them all. However he contrived it has been to many a mystery. Once, when Sir Samuel Romilly was requested to undertake some new work, he excused himself by saying that he had no time, quote, "but," unquote, he added, quote, "go with it to that fellow Brougham. He seems to have time for everything," unquote. The secret of it was that he never left a minute unemployed. Withal, he possessed a constitution of iron. When he arrived at an age at which most men would have retired from the world to enjoy their hard-earned leisure, perhaps to doze away their time in an easy chair, Lord Brougham commenced and prosecuted a series of elaborate investigations as to the laws of light, and he submitted the results to the most scientific audiences that Paris and London could muster. About the same time, he was passing through the press his admirable sketches of the men of science and literature of the reign of George III, and taking his full share of the law business of the political discussions in the House of Lords. Sidney Smith once recommended him to confine himself to only the transaction of so much business as 3 strong men could get through, but such was Brougham's love for work, long become a habit, that no amount of application seems to have been too great for him, and such was his love of excellence, that it has been said of him that if his station in life had only been that of a shoeblack, he would have never rested satisfied until he had become the best shoeblack in England. Another hard-working man of the same class is Sir E. Bulwer-Lytton. Few writers have done more or achieved higher distinction in various walks as a novelist, poet, dramatist, historian, essayist, orator, and politician. He has worked his way step by step, disdainful of ease, and animated throughout by the ardent desire to excel. On the score of mere industry, there are few living English writers who have written so much, and none that have produced so much of high quality. The industry of Bulwer is entitled to all the greater praise that it has been entirely self-imposed. To hunt and shoot and live at ease, to frequent the clubs and enjoy the operas, with the variety of London visiting and sightseeing during the season, and then off to the country mansion, with its well-stocked preserves and its 1,000 delightful outdoor pleasures, to travel abroad to Paris, Vienna, or Rome. All this is excessively attractive to a lover of pleasure and a man of fortune, and by no means calculated to make him voluntarily undertake continuous labor of any kind. Yet these pleasures all within his reach, Bulwer must, as compared with the men born to similar estate, have denied himself in assuming the position and pursuing the career of a literary man. Like Byron, his first effort was political, Weeds and Wildflowers, and a failure. His second was a novel, Falkland, and it proved a failure too. A man of a weaker nerve would have dropped authorship, but Bulwer had pluck and perseverance, and he worked on. Determined to succeed, he was incessantly industrious, read extensively, and from failure went courageously onwards to success. Pelham followed Falkland within a year, and the remainder of Bulwer's literary life, now extending over a period of 30 years, has been a succession of triumphs. Mr. Disraeli affords a similar instance in the power of industry and application in working out an eminent public career. His first achievements were like in Bulwer's in literature, and he reached success only through a succession of failures. His Wondrous Tale of Alroy and revolutionary epic were laughed at and regarded as indications of literary lunacy, but he worked in on other directions, and his Coningsby, Sybil, and Tancred proved the sterling stuff of which he was made. As an orator, too, his first appearance in the House of Commons was a failure. It was spoken of as, quote, more screaming than an Adelphi farce, unquote, though composed in a grand and ambitious strain. Every sentence was hailed with, quote, loud laughter, unquote. Hamlet, played as a comedy, were nothing to it, but he concluded with a sentence which embodied a prophecy. Writhing under the laughing with which his studied eloquence had been received, he exclaimed, quote, "I've begun several times many things and have succeeded in them at last. I shall sit down now, but the time will come when you will hear me." Unquote. The time did come, and how Disraeli succeeded in at length commanding the attention of the first assembly of gentlemen in the world affords a striking illustration of what energy and determination will do. For Disraeli earned his position by dint of patient industry. He did not, as many young men do, having once failed, retire dejected, to mope and whine in a corner, but diligently set himself to work. He carefully unlearned his faults, studied the character of his audience, practiced sedulously the art of speech, and industrially filled his mind with the elements of parliamentary knowledge. He worked patiently for success, and it came but slowly. Then the House laughed with him instead of at him. The recollection of his early failure was effaced, and by general consent he was at length admitted to be one of the most finished and effective of parliamentary speakers. Although much may be accomplished by means of individual industry and energy, as these and other instances set forth in the following pages serve to illustrate, it must at the same time be acknowledged that the help with which we derive from others in the journey of life is of very great importance. The poet Wordsworth as well said that, quote, "These two things, contradictory though they may seem, must go together: manly dependence and manly independence, manly reliance and manly self-reliance. From infancy to old age, all are more or less indebted to others for nurture and culture, and the best and strongest are usually found the readiest to acknowledge such help. Take, for example, the career of the late Alexis de Tocqueville, a man doubly well born, for his father was a distinguished peer of France and his mother a granddaughter of Malesherbes. Through powerful family influence, he was appointed judge auditor at Versailles when only 21, but probably feeling that he had not fairly won the position by merit, he determined to give it up and owe his future advancement in life to himself alone. A foolish resolution, some will say, but de Tocqueville bravely acted it out. He resigned his appointment and made arrangements to leave France for the purpose of traveling through the United States, the results of which were published in his great book on Democracy in America. His friend and traveling companion, Gustave de Beaumont, has described his indefatigable industry during this journey. Quote, "His nature," unquote, he says, quote, "was wholly averse to idleness, and whether he was traveling or resting, his mind was always at work." Unquote. With Alexis, the most agreeable conversation was that which was the most useful. The worst day was the lost day, or the day ill spent. The least loss of time annoyed him. Tocqueville himself wrote to a friend, quote, "There is no time at which one can wholly cease from action, for effort without one's self, and still more effort within, is equally necessary, if not more so, when we grow old. As it is in youth, I compare man in this world to a traveler journeying without seizing a colder and colder region. The higher he goes, the faster he ought to walk. The great malady of the soul is cold, and in resisting this formidable evil, one needs not only to be sustained by the action of a mind employed, but also by contact with one's fellows in the business of life." Notwithstanding de Tocqueville's decided views as to the necessity of exercising individual energy and self-dependence, no one could be more ready than he was to recognize the value of that help and support for which all men are indebted to others, in a greater or less degree. Thus he often acknowledged with gratitude his obligation to his friends de Kergorle and Stoffels, to the former for intellectual assistance and to the latter for moral support and sympathy. To de Kergorle he wrote, quote, Thine is the only soul in which I have confidence, and whose influence exercises a genuine effect upon my own. Many others have influence upon the details of my actions, but no one has so much influence as thou on the origination of fundamental ideas, and of those principles which are the rule of conduct." Unquote. De Tocqueville was not less ready to confess the great obligations which he owed to his wife Marie for the preservation of that temper and frame of mind which enabled him to prosecute his studies with success. He believed that a noble-minded woman insensibly elevated the character of a husband, while one of a groveling nature as certainly tended to degrade it. And fine human character is molded by 1,000 subtle influences, by example and precept, by life and literature, by friends and neighbors, by the world we live in, as well as by the spirits of our forefathers, whose legacy of good words and deeds we inherit. But great unquestionably, though these influences are acknowledged to be, it is nevertheless equally clear that men must necessarily be the active agents of their own well-being and well-doing, and that however much the wise and the good may owe to others, they themselves must in the very nature of things be their own best helpers. End of Section 3. Recorded by Mike Ferry 252.
Section 4 of Self-Help. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wilkie Mills, Buffalo, New York. Self-Help with Illustrations of Conduct and Perseverance by Samuel Smiles. Chapter 2, Leaders of Industry, Inventors, and Producers. Part 1. Quote, "Les travaux et la science sont désormais les maîtres du monde." Close quote. Work and science are now masters of the world. De Salvandi. Quote, "Deduct all that men of the humbler classes have done for England in the way of inventions only, and see where she would have been but for them." Closed quote. Arthur Helps. One of the most strongly marked features of the English people is their spirit of industry, standing out prominent and distinct in their past history, and as strikingly characteristic of them now as at any former period. It is this spirit, displayed by the Commons of England, which has laid the foundations and built up the industrial greatness of the empire. This vigorous growth of the nation has been mainly the result of the free energy of individuals, and it has been contingent upon the number of hands and minds from time to time actively employed within it, whether as cultivators of the soil, producers of articles of utility, contrivers of tools and machines, writers of books, or creators of works of art. And while this spirit of active industry has been the vital principle of the nation, it has also been its saving and remedial one, counteracting from time to time the effects of errors in our laws and imperfections in our Constitution. The career of industry which the nation has pursued has also proved its best education. As steady application to work is the healthiest training for every individual, so is it the best discipline of a state. Honorable industry travels the same road with duty, and Providence has closely linked both with happiness. The gods, says the poet, have placed labor and toil on the way leading to the Elysian fields. Certain it is that no bread eaten by man is so sweet as that earned by his own labor, whether bodily or mental. By labor, the earth has been subdued, and man redeemed from barbarism. nor has a single step in civilization been made without it. Labor is not only a necessity and a duty, but a blessing. Only the idler feels it to be a curse. The duty of work is written on the thews and muscles of the limbs, the mechanism of the hand, the nerves and lobes of the brain, the sum of whose healthy action is satisfaction and enjoyment. In the school of labor is taught the best practical wisdom, nor is a life of manual employment, as we shall hereafter find, incompatible with high mental culture. Hugh Miller, than whom none knew better the strength and weakness belonging to the lot of labor, stated the result of his experience to be that work, even the hardest, is full of pleasure and materials for self-improvement. He held honest labor to be the best of teachers, and that the school of toil is the noblest of schools, save only the Christian one, that it is a school in which the ability of being useful is imparted, the spirit of independence learnt, and the habit of persevering effort acquired. He was even of opinion that the training of the mechanic, by the exercise which it gives to his observant faculties, from his daily dealings with things actual and practical, and the close experience of life which he acquires, better fits him for picking his way along the journey of life, and is more favorable to his growth as a man, emphatically speaking, than the training afforded by any other condition. The array of great names which we have already curiously cited, of men springing from the ranks of the industrial classes, who have achieved distinction in various walks of life, in science, commerce, literature, and art, shows that at all events the difficulties imposed by poverty and labor are not insurmountable. As respects the great contrivances and inventions which have conferred so much power and wealth upon the nation, it is unquestionable that for the greater part of them we have been indebted to men of the humblest rank. Deduct what they have done in this particular line of action, and it will be found that very little indeed remains for other men to have accomplished. Inventors have set in motion some of the greatest industries in the world. To them, society owes many of its chief necessaries, comforts, and luxuries, and by their genius and labor, daily life has been rendered in all respects more easy as well as enjoyable. Our food, our clothing, the furniture of our homes, the glass which admits the light to our dwellings at the same time that it excludes the cold, the gas which illuminates our streets, our means of locomotion by land and by sea, the tools by which our various articles of necessity and luxury are fabricated, have been the result of the labor and ingenuity of many men and many minds. Mankind, at large, are all the happier for such inventions, and are every day reaping the benefit of them in an increase of individual well-being as well as of public enjoyment. Though the invention of the working steam engine, the king of machines, belongs, comparatively speaking, to our own epoch, the idea of it was born many centuries ago. Like other contrivances and discoveries, it was effected step by step, one man transmitting the result of his labors, at the time apparently useless, to his successors, who took it up and carried it forward another stage, the prosecution of the inquiry extending over many generations. Thus, the idea promulgated by Hero of Alexandria was never altogether lost, but, like the grain of wheat hid in the hand of the Egyptian mummy, it sprouted and again grew vigorously when brought into the full light of modern science. The steam engine was nothing, however, until it emerged from the state of theory and was taken in hand by practical mechanics. And what a noble story of patient, laborious investigation of difficulties encountered and overcome by heroic industry does not that marvelous machine tell of? It is indeed, in itself, a monument of the power of self-help in man. Grouped around it we find Savary, the military engineer, Newcomen, the Dartmouth blacksmith, Cowley, the glazier, Potter, the engine boy, Smeaton, the civil engineer, and towering above all, the laborious, patient, never-tiring James Watt, the mathematical instrument maker. Watt was one of the most industrious of men, and the story of his life proves what all experience confirms, that it is not the man of the greatest natural vigor and capacity who achieves the highest results, but he who employs his powers with the greatest industry and the most carefully disciplined skill. The skill that comes by labor, application, and experience. Many men in his time knew far more than Watt, but none labored so assiduously as he did to turn all that he did know to useful, practical purposes. He was, above all things, most persevering in the pursuit of facts. He cultivated carefully that habit of active attention on which all the higher working qualities of the mind mainly depend. Indeed, Mr. Edgeworth entertained the opinion that the difference of intellect in men depends more upon the early cultivation of this habit of attention than upon any great disparity between the powers of one individual and another. Even when a boy, Watt found science in his toys. The quadrants lying about his father's carpenter's shop led him to the study of optics and astronomy. His ill health induced him to pry into the secrets of physiology, and his solitary walks through the country attracted him to the study of botany and history. While carrying on the business of a mathematical instrument maker, he received an order to build an organ, and though without an ear for music, he undertook the study of harmonics and successfully constructed the instrument. And, in like manner, when the little model of Newcomen's steam engine belonging to the University of Glasgow was placed in his hands to repair, he forthwith set himself to learn all that was then known about heat, evaporation, and condensation, at the same time plodding his way in mechanics and the science of construction, the results of which he at length embodied in his condensing steam engine. For 10 years he went on contriving and inventing, with little hope to cheer him and with few friends to encourage him. He went on, meanwhile, earning bread for his family by making and selling quadrants, making and mending fiddles, flutes, and musical instruments, measuring mason work, surveying roads, superintending the construction of canals, or doing anything that turned up and offered a prospect of honest gain. At length, Watt found a fit partner in another eminent leader of industry, Matthew Boulton of Birmingham, a skillful, energetic, and far-seeing man who vigorously undertook the enterprise of introducing the condensing engine into general use as a working power, and the success of both is now a matter of history. Many skillful inventors have from time to time added new power to the steam engine, and, by numerous modifications, rendered it capable of being applied to nearly all the purposes of manufacture, driving machinery, impelling ships, grinding corn, printing books, stamping money, hammering, planing, and turning iron. In short, of performing every description of mechanical labor where power is required. One of the most useful modifications in the engine was that devised by Trepetich and eventually perfected by George Stephenson and his son in the form of railway locomotive, by which social changes of immense importance have been brought about, of even greater consequence considered in their results on human progress and civilization than the condensing engine of Watt. One of the first grand results of Watt's invention, which placed an almost unlimited power at the command of the producing classes, was the establishment of the cotton manufacture. The person most closely identified with the foundation of this great branch of industry was unquestionably Sir Richard Arkwright, whose practical energy and sagacity were perhaps even more remarkable than his mechanical inventiveness. His originality as an inventor has indeed been called in question, like that of Watt and Stephenson. Arkwright probably stood in the same relation to the spinning machine that Watt did to the steam engine and Stephenson to the locomotive. He gathered together the scattered threads of ingenuity which already existed and wove them after his own design into a new and original fabric. Though Louis Paul of Birmingham patented the invention of spinning by rollers 30 years before Arkwright, the machines constructed by him were so imperfect in their details that they could not be profitably worked, and the invention was practically a failure. Another obscure mechanic, a reed maker of Leh named Thomas Hayes, is also said to have invented the water frame and spinning jenny, but they too proved unsuccessful. When the demands of industry are found to press upon the resources of inventors, the same idea is usually found floating about in many minds, such has been the case with the steam engine, the safety lamp, the electric telegraph, and other inventions. Many ingenious minds are found laboring in the throes of invention, until at length the mastermind, the strong practical man, steps forward and straightway delivers them of their idea, applies the principle successfully, and the thing is done. Then there is a loud outcry among all the smaller contrivers who see themselves distanced in the race, and hence men such as Watt, Stephenson, and Arkwright have usually to defend their reputation and their rights as practical and successful inventors. Richard Arkwright, like most of our great mechanicians, sprang from the ranks. He was born in Preston in 1732. His parents were very poor, and he was the youngest of 13 children. He was never at school. The only education he received he gave to himself, and to the last he was only able to write with difficulty. When a boy, he was apprenticed to a barber, and after learning the business, he set up for himself in Bolton, where he occupied an underground cellar, over which he put up the sign, "Come to the subterraneous barber. He shaves for a penny." The other barbers found their customers leaving them, and reduced their prices to his standard, when Arkwright, determined to push his trade, announced his determination to give a clean shave for a halfpenny. After a few years, he quitted his cellar and became an itinerant dealer in hair. At that time, wigs were worn, and wig-making formed an important branch of the barbering business. Arkwright went about buying hair for the wigs. He was accustomed to attend the hiring fairs throughout Lancashire resorted to by young women for the purpose of securing their long tresses, and it is said that in negotiations of this sort he was very successful. He also dealt in a chemical hair dye, which he used adroitly and thereby secured a considerable trade. But he does not seem, notwithstanding his pushing character, to have done more than earn a bare living. The fashion of wig-wearing having undergone a change, distress fell upon the wig-makers, and Arkwright, being of a mechanical turn, was consequently induced to turn machine inventor or conjurer, as the pursuit was then popularly termed. Many attempts were made about that time to invent a spinning machine, and our barber determined to launch his little bark on the sea of invention with the rest. Like other self-taught men of the same bias, he had already been devoting his spare time to the invention of a perpetual motion machine, and from that the transition to a spinning machine was easy. He followed his experiments so assiduously that he neglected his business, lost the little money he had saved, and was reduced to great poverty. His wife, for he had by this time married, was impatient at what she conceived to be a wanton waste of time and money, and in a moment of sudden wrath she seized upon and destroyed his models, hoping thus to remove the cause of the family privations. Arkwright was a stubborn and enthusiastic man, and he was provoked beyond measure by this conduct of his wife, from whom he immediately separated. In traveling about the country, Arkwright had become acquainted with a person named Kay, a clockmaker at Warrington, who assisted him in constructing some of the parts of his perpetual motion machinery. It is supposed that he was informed by Kay of the principle of spinning by rollers, but it is also said that the idea was first suggested to him by accidentally observing a red-hot piece of iron become elongated by passing between iron rollers. However this may be, the idea at once took firm possession of his mind, and he proceeded to devise the process by which it was to be accomplished, Kay being able to tell him nothing on this point. Arkwright now abandoned his business of hair collecting and devoted himself to the perfecting of his machine, a model of which, constructed by Kay under his directions, he set up in the parlor of the Free Grammar School at Preston. Being a burgess of the town, he voted at the contested election at which General Burgoyne was returned, but such was his poverty and such the tattered state of his dress that a number of persons subscribed a sum sufficient to have him put in a state fit to appear in the poll room. The exhibition of his machine in a town where so many workpeople lived by the exercise of manual labor proved a dangerous experiment. Ominous growlings were heard outside the schoolroom from time to time, and Arkwright, remembering the fate of Kay, who was mobbed and compelled to fly from Lancashire because of his invention of the fly shuttle, and of poor Hargraves, whose spinning jenny had been pulled to pieces only a short time before by a Blackburn mob, wisely determined on packing up his model and removing to a less dangerous locality. He went, accordingly, to Nottingham, where he applied to some of the local bankers for pecuniary assistance, and the Messrs. Wright consented to advance him a sum of money on condition of sharing in the profits of the invention. The machine, however, not being perfected so soon as they had anticipated, the bankers recommended Arkwright to apply to Messrs. Strutt and Need, the former of whom was the ingenious inventor and patentee of the stocking frame. Mr. Strutt at once appreciated the merits of the invention, and a partnership was entered into with Arkwright, whose road to fortune was now clear. The patent was secured in the name of Richard Arkwright of Nottingham, clockmaker, and it is a circumstance worthy of note that it was taken out in 1769, the same year in which Watt secured the patent for his steam engine. A cotton mill was first erected at Nottingham, driven by horses, and another was shortly after built on a much larger scale at Cromford in Derbyshire, turned by a water wheel, from which circumstance the spinning machine came to be called the water frame. Arkwright's labors, however, were comparatively speaking only begun. He had still to perfect all the working details of his machine. It was in his hands the subject of constant modification and improvement until eventually it was rendered practicable and profitable in an eminent degree. But success was only secured by long and patient labor. For some years, indeed, the speculation was disheartening and unprofitable, swallowing up a very large amount of capital without any result. When success began to appear more certain, then the Lancashire manufacturers fell upon Arkwright's patent to pull it in pieces, as the Cornish miners fell upon Boulton and Watt to rob them of the profits of their steam engine. Arkwright was even denounced as the enemy of the working people, and a mill which he built near Chorley was destroyed by a mob in the presence of a strong force of police and military. The Lancashire men refused to buy his materials, though they were confessedly the best in the market. Then they refused to pay patent right for the use of his machines and combined to crush him in the courts of law. To the disgust of right-minded people, Arkwright's patent was upset. After the trial, when passing the hotel at which his opponents were staying, one of them said, loud enough to be heard by him, "Well, we've done the old shaver at last." To which he coolly replied, "Never mind, I've a razor left that will shave you all." He established new mills in Lancashire, Derbyshire, and at New Lanark in Scotland. The mills at Cronford also came into his hands at the expiry of his partnership with Strutt, and the amount and the excellence of his products were such that in a short time he obtained so complete a control of the trade that the prices were fixed by him, and he governed the main operations of the other cotton spinners. Arkwright was a man of great force of character, indomitable courage, much worldly shrewdness, with a business faculty almost amounting to genius. At one period, his time was engrossed by severe and continuous labor, occasioned by the organizing and conducting of his numerous manufactories, sometimes from 4 in the morning till 9 at night. At 50 years of age, he set to work to learn English grammar and improve himself in writing and orthography. After overcoming every obstacle, he had the satisfaction of reaping the reward of his enterprise. 18 years after he had constructed his first machine, he rose to such estimation in Derbyshire that he was appointed High Sheriff of the county, and shortly after George III conferred upon him the honor of knighthood. He died in 1792. Be it for good or for evil, Arkwright was the founder in England of the modern factory system, a branch of industry which has unquestionably proved a source of immense wealth to individuals and to the nation. All the other great branches of industry in Britain furnish like examples of energetic men of business, the source of much benefit to the neighborhoods in which they have labored, and of increased power and wealth to the community at large. Amongst such might be cited the Strutts of Belper, the Tennants of Glasgow, the Marshalls and Gotts of Leeds, the Peels, Ashworths, Burleys, Fieldons, Ashtons, Haywoods, and Ainsworths of South Lancashire, some of whose descendants have since become distinguished in connection with the political history of England. Such preeminently were the Peels of South Lancashire. The founder of the Peel family, about the middle of last century, was a small yeoman occupying the Whole House farm near Blackburn, from which he afterwards removed to a house situated in Fish Lane in that town. Robert Peel, as he advanced in life, saw a large family of sons and daughters growing up about him, but the land about Blackburn being somewhat barren, it did not appear to him that agricultural pursuits offered a very encouraging prospect for their industry. The place had, however, long been the seat of a domestic manufacture, the fabric called Blackburn Greys, consisting of linen weft and cotton warp, being chiefly made in that town and its neighborhood. It was then customary, previous to the introduction of the factory system, for industrious yeomen with families to employ the time not occupied in the fields in weaving at home, and Robert Peel accordingly began a domestic trade of calico making. He was honest and made an honest article, thrifty and hard-working, and his trade prospered. He was also enterprising and was one of the first to adopt the carding cylinder, then recently invented. But Robert Peel's attention was principally directed to the printing of calico, then a comparatively unknown art, and for some time he carried on a series of experiments with the object of printing by machinery. The experiments were secretly conducted in his own house, the cloth being ironed for the purpose by one of the women of the family. It was then customary in such houses as the Peels to use pewter plates at dinner. Having sketched a figure or pattern on one of the plates, the thought struck him that an impression might be got from it in reverse and printed on calico with color. In a cottage at the end of the farmhouse lived a woman who kept a calendaring machine, and going into her cottage, he put the plate with color rubbed into the figured part and some calico over it through the machine, when it was found to leave a satisfactory impression. Such is said to have been the origin of roller printing on calico. Robert Peel shortly perfected his process, and the first pattern he brought out was a parsley leaf. Hence, he is spoken of in the neighborhood of Blackbourn to this day as Parsley Peel. The process of calico printing by what is called the mule machine, that is, by means of a wooden cylinder in relief with an engraved copper cylinder, was afterwards brought to perfection by one of his sons, the head of the firm of Messrs. Peel and Company of Church. Stimulated by his success, Robert Peel shortly gave up farming, and removing to Brookside, a village about 2 miles from Blackburn, he devoted himself exclusively to the printing business. There, with the aid of his sons, who were as energetic as himself, he successfully carried on the trade for several years. And as the young men grew up towards manhood, the concern branched out into various firms of Peels, each of which became a center of industrial activity and a source of remunerative employment to large numbers of people. From what can now be learnt of the character of the original and untitled Robert Peel, he must have been a remarkable man, shrewd, sagacious, and far-seeing. But little is known of him excepting from traditions, and the sons of those who knew him are fast passing away. His son, Sir Robert, thus modestly spoke of him, quote, "My father may be truly said to have been the founder of our family, and he so accurately appreciated the importance of commercial wealth in a national point of view that he was often heard to say that the gains to individuals were small compared with the national gains arising from trade." Closed quote. End of section 4. Recording by Wilkie Mills, Buffalo, New York.